Yeah, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to our afternoon session and also the next highlight of our conference. My name is Benno Fladvad, and I have the honor to introduce our next keynote speaker, Professor Chantal Mouffe from the University of Westminster, who in fact would not need any introduction because of her seminal and very influential contributions to political theory and more specifically to democratic theory. We're very pleased to have you here, Professor Mouffe, and I just want to briefly mention one of the most important milestones of your career and some themes of your work. Chantal Mouffe has worked in many universities throughout the world, in North America, in South America, and also in Europe. She has held visiting positions in Harvard, Cornell, the University of California, in Princeton, and also the French National Center for Scientific Research. During 1989 and 1995, she served as a program director at the prestigious Collège International de Philosophie in Paris. And currently, she holds a professorship emeritus at the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Westminster, where she is also a member of the Center for the Study of Democracy and the Institute of Modern and Contemporary Culture. Undoubtedly, the most influential work of Chantal Mouffe dates back to 1985. Together with the political theorist Ernesto Laclau, Chantal Mouffe published the book Hegemony and Socialist Strategy, Towards a Radical Democratic Politics, which formed the basis of her political thought insofar as it represented a profound critique of Marxism and a reformulation of Gramsci's hegemonic theory, to which still many critical thinkers in several disciplines refer. One of the central arguments of the book is that the sphere of the political is essentially groundless, which means that it cannot be traced back to a foundational essential ground or an internal truth, but is always characterized by antagonisms and a constant struggle between competing hegemonies. And this notion of ineradicable social antagonism is also the core theme of Chantal Mouffe's later work, in which she focused on conceptualizing an agonistic model of democracy, most notably in the books on the political in 2005 or Agonistics, Thinking the World Politically in 2013, and also some other books. This theory basically builds on the assumption that democracy can only work if its institutions enable a constant struggle between political opponents, and if the struggle is being eliminated, for example, or most notably in the form of green capitalism, it will inevitably lead to a post-political society. However, and this is one of the arguments of her book For a Left Populism in 2018, the political cannot be permanently suppressed, but sooner or later will return, leading to the emergence of populist movements. Now that we're currently witnessing such a populist moment, as Mouffe calls it, especially the ever-increasing rise of right-wing parties, we can see that her political thought is very timely. But it is even more timely because, and this is basically the reason why we invited her to this conference, because Chantal Mouffe has more recently also turned her political thought to the question of how to respond to the ecological crisis of the Anthropocene and to the habitability of the Earth system. And also she has focused on the power of facts. And her proposal, which is the key theme of her talk today, is basically to repoliticize the ecological crisis, to build new frontiers and alliances, and to strive towards what she calls, with her new book that also has very recently been published in German, towards a green democratic revolution. Therefore, I want to leave you the stage now and look very much forward to your lecture that is entitled A Left Populist Strategy for Green Democratic Revolution.
Thank you very much. Well, in fact, but I'm still going to do it because I thought it's important to explain that. In fact, my intervention is going to be slightly different from the one that have been presented here before, because I'm speaking as a political theorist, you know. So don't expect me to give you measure or things that people should be done. I'm really going to make that from a more theoretical perspective. And I want to insist know why this talk is called Left Populist Strategy for a Green Democratic Revolution. And I want to explain exactly, first what I understand by left populist strategy, because it's something that, populism has become now a term that is used in so many different ways that, it become absolutely, not meaningful anymore. And I also want to insist on the theoretical basis of my intervention here, because that has been already mentioned by the person who introduced me, but I think that I need also to make a few more comments about that, because it's very important to understand exactly what kind of strategy is the left populist, and later on the relation with the democratic revolution, because so I'm going to begin by left populist strategy. And I think that it's important. I want to insist on that because I think it's not possible to understand what I mean by a left populist strategy if you don't see what is the theoretical background for that. And the theoretical background is, we can characterize it, but it's an anti-essentialist perspective. It's a post-foundationalist one, and it also is based on the dissociative conception of the political. I'm going to, specify all that in a moment. But all this theoretical approach has been in fact developed in the book that was mentioned before, and that I wrote with Ernesto Laclau, published in 1985, Hegemony and Socialist Strategy towards a Radical Democratic Politics. So this is the kind of basis where all the theory is developed. And then later on, I also draw on the work of Ernesto Laclau, on particularly his book on political reason. And so you need to understand exactly the context in order to see what's really specific to my approach. So I'm going to begin by that. So I tell you in advance, my talk is really very, very philosophical, very theoretical. I hope that you don't mind that. So what we did in Hegemony and Socialist Strategy is to bring together insight from post-structuralism in wide sense, and from Antonio Gramsci. So this is particular to the approach, because there are a lot of people who've been working on Gramsci, but not with post-structuralism, or vice versa. And on the basis of this articulation between Gramsci and post-structuralism, we propose an alternative approach of the political centered around the notion of the social as a discursive space. So this sometimes, this theory that we established with Ernesto is called the discursive approach to politics. Here I want to mention that we understand discourse in a very different way as discourse in Habermas. That's important for you, because we don't mean, in a sense, it can be absolutely opposite to the conception of Habermas. So we argue that they are insisting on emphasizing the central role of the political in the structuration of society. So that's where the question of Gramsci and post-structuralism goes together, because post-structuralism does not necessarily insist on the importance of the political. So Gramsci is there the central reference. The two key concepts to define our approach are, and this is what we think are needed to address the question of political, are antagonism on one side and hegemony on the other. That is, on one side, it is necessary to acknowledge what we call the dimension of the political as the ever-present possibility of antagonism. So this is what corresponds to the idea of the dissociative conception of the political, because there are two conceptions of the nature of the political. On one side, and is the dominant one, is the idea that the political is the space of liberty, and the people say the political in the noble sense, the sphere in which we should all try to reach consensus, and this is what that developed the idea of democracy as basically the search for consensus, and we find that in Habermas, we find that in Rawls, how are we going to establish the procedure which will guarantee consensus. Well, we start from the idea that consensus is not possible because, in question of political, because this is precisely what is specific of the dissociative approach to say that the politics is about conflict, it's about antagonism, because antagonism is a special kind of conflict. Not all conflicts are antagonistic. Antagonism is a conflict that cannot have a rational solution. So you can see here where the difference from Habermas. Habermas believes that there is always possibility by different ways of reaching a rational consensus. So this is very important, the question of acknowledging the ever-present possibility of the political. And this, in fact, requires, on the other side, coming to terms with the lack of a final ground and the undecidability that pervades every order, and to conceive society as the product of a series of practices whose aim is to establish order in a context of contingency. The context is always contingent. And this, of course, is the idea where the idea of hegemony is central. Every order is always an hegemonic order. I mean, it excludes other possibilities. Those practices through which a social order is created and the meaning of institution is fixed is what we call hegemonic practices. The hegemonic approach acknowledges that social reality is discursively constructed and that identities are the result of complex processes of identification. Here there is a very important influence of psychoanalysis on our work. For psychoanalysis, there are no identities. Every identities are result of process of identification. And they can be transformed through hegemonic practices. So that's absolutely crucial, I think, to understand the possibility of politics and what politics can do precisely, to create new form of identification. And we also insist that it is only through insertion in a manifold of practices and language game, here I use language games in the sense in which Wittgenstein used it, that specific form of individualities are constructed. So again, there are no natural identities. They are always a result of hegemonic construction. Our discursive approach envisages the world as an entirely social construction of human beings, which is not grounded on any metaphysical necessity that will be external to the world, either God or law of history, essential form. So we put that into question. Every order is the temporary and precarious articulation of contingent practices. It means that things could always have been otherwise, and every order is predicated on the exclusion of other possibilities. It is always the expression of a particular structure of power relation. That's what the concept of hegemony brings to the fore. What is at a given moment accepted as the natural order, that all things are, and that creates what Gramsci called the common sense, the way in which we see things and we think that they are natural, is always the result of sedimented hegemonic practices. It is never the expression of a deeper objectivity that will bring things into being. Here I think it's important, for instance, to put into question affirmation like the one that have been really imposed on us during the time of neoliberal hegemony. There is no alternative. There are always alternative, because every order is a specific form of articulation, and it always, is against other form of articulation. So there is never a situation in which you can say there is no alternative. And I think that for politics is very important, the possibility of thinking that the world could be otherwise, By acknowledging the plurality of social agents and their struggle, the field of social conflict is extended rather than being concentrated in a privileged agent like the working class. It is for this reason that we reformulated the emancipatory project in terms of a processes of radicalization of democracy. This is the reason why our approach has been called post-Marxist. Well, I want to insist on this. It's post-Marxist, yeah, but it's not anti-Marxist. You know, it's something that we take in account the important contribution of Marxism to the thinking of politics, and in a moment I'm going to say where there are some kind of contact. But, you know, it is something we think that, you know, Marx was thinking at a specific time, and it doesn't mean that, you know, what he was written is necessarily something that, you know, it's not the capital is not the Quran, you know, it's not something that we got going to interpret. No, it can be new development need to force us to, you know, think further. So, but we do. It's not certainly not anti-Marxist, and we are thinking that well, within this kind of Marxist approach. For instance, and that in terms of political project is also important. We emphasize that the extension and radicalization of democratic struggle. Remember, I've just said that we say that the emancipatory project should not be understood in terms of socialism, but in terms of radicalization of democracy. So it means that this process of radicalization of democracy will never have a final point of arrival in the achievement of fully liberated society. For instance, here we were accord with Derrida speak of democracy to come. But it will always be to come. It needs to be open to development of new possibilities. And this is, we say, why the myth of communism as a transparent society, a reconciled society, which will clearly imply the end of politics, must be abandoned. According to our perspective, the emancipatory project cannot be conceived anymore as the elimination of power and the management of their affairs by social agents that will be identified with the viewpoint of social totality. There will always be antagonistic struggle. This is what I said, that, for instance, the idea of communism will imply the end of the political, in the sense of, you know, having antagonism. There will always be antagonism, struggle, and partial opaqueness of the social. Radical politics, and that's quite important, cannot be conceived anymore as a step outside our institution, but as an engagement with those institutions with the aim of transforming them. This is why, for instance, in one of my books, I criticize very much the strategy of exodus presented by Art and Negri, you know, and there are different forms, of course, in which you say you don't need to engage with the institution. You know, it's a strategy. I oppose a strategy of desertion of institution with a strategy of engagement with the institution. And so the hegemonic approach is definitively a strategy of engaging with the institution in order to transform them. Borrowing a term from Gramsci, we propose to visualize this strategy as what Gramsci called a war of position, which consists in a series of counter-hegemonic interventions whose objective is to disarticulate the existing hegemony and to bring about a more progressive one. And that process is a question of rearticulation of new and old elements into a different configuration of power. So we shall always start from a specific conjuncture, analyze it, and see how it can be, you know, transformed, rearticulated. Hegemony is obtained through the construction of what we call nodal points, which discursively fix the meaning of social institutions and social practices through which a specific conception of reality is established. Such a result will always be contingent and precarious. And every order is therefore susceptible, I was saying before, of being challenged by counter-hegemonic intervention. And the aim is, as I was saying, disarticulating this order and trying to establish another form of hegemony. And of course, this is the aim of a left populist strategy, to engage with the institution, to transform them, to rearticulate them, and to create another hegemony. But every order is an hegemonic order. So this kind of society without power relation is something that is not possible, because society is made through power relation. The end of power relation will mean the end of society. One of the crucial dimensions of hegemonic politics consists in establishing what we call chain of equivalence between various democratic demands. It's clear that the manifold of democratic demands that exist in our society do not necessarily converge, and that they can even conflict with each other. And this is why they need to be articulated politically. And that's required, and that's going to play an important role in my further argument, an hegemonic signifier, which can be, in some cases, a leader or a special struggle. So hegemonic signifier is the way in which a chain of equivalence is going to be, to use a term from psychology, sutured, close, and this is something which will allow to give sense, to a certain meaning to this articulation. And this is the way in which this principle of articulation can be, as I was saying before, either a leader, for instance, Nelson Mandela, but it's all not necessarily is a leader. And this is a criticism which is common of hegemonic, of populism. But necessarily you have an authoritarian leader. But here I've got two answers to that. First, you need a symbol that really symbolizes the articulation of the struggle. But this does not mean that there is a leader which is authoritarian, because you can perfectly have leaders who are not authoritarian, leaders who are primus inter pares, for instance. But you don't even need always a leader, because sometimes it's a specific struggle that become, the symbol of all the struggle. For instance, an example that we were giving when it was Ernesto, in fact, was giving this example in Poland, the struggle of Solidarność. Solidarność was the hegemonic signifier was the struggle of the people at Gdańsk. It was not Walensa. Well, the people, the struggle which united all those struggles was the struggle against, I'm trying to remember here, what is I said that in the chantier naval, the name come to me in French, but the Gdańsk, the struggle of the worker in the chantier naval. I don't know if you say that in English, really. And this need for an hegemonic signifier to bring together some kind of unity among the struggle means that what is at stake, really, in this articulation is the creation of a collective will. That's again a term borrowed from Gramsci. A we can say. And this also requires, and that's another important thesis of the dissociative approach of the political, the determination of the day. Politics is always the creation of a we, and that requires the day. There is absolutely no possibility of a we, which does not have any, in fact, in more theoretical terms, you say the identity always implies difference. That's the title of a book by William Connolly, for instance. In order to have identity, you need to have that difference. So a we implies that there is a they. Of course, it doesn't mean that the they will be an enemy. It can be, and that's not going to develop that here, but in the introduction it was said that my conception of agonism is precisely a way in which we conceive a relation we-they, which is not a relation of friend and enemy, but a relation of adversaries. Adversaries know that they will never arrive to a rational consensus, but the difference they don't see the opponent as an enemy to be destroyed, but as an opponent with whose demands need to be respected in the sense, not that we should accept them and put them into practice, but for instance, we should accept to engage in an agonistic struggle with them. We are not going to say those people, we don't even speak with them. I think it's quite important that, of course, it's something we can discuss later, but I think that today, in general, it's a question really how to deal with right-wing populist movement. Some people will say, well, they should not even be able to present candidates at the election. They are not, in France, they are not part of the Republican arc. Or should we see them as adversaries? So we should respect, let's say, they have got the right to defend their position. We are going to fight with them, even, strongly, but, we are not going to say you don't even have the right to defend your position. So that's the difference I made between adversaries and enemies. And this is to show that the conception of, there is never a we without a they, but the they can be conceived as an enemy to be destroyed, or it can be conceived, as an adversary. And I think that's the democratic way to think about this we-they construction. So this is what I was saying. Why the construction of collective will require defining an adversary. And here I would say such an adversary cannot be conceived as subsumed under an hegemonic label. For instance, say, capitalism. I think it doesn't really matter. Our enemy or adversary is capitalism. You are not going to really be able to create an active political movement if you say, it's capitalism. It needs to be, and that was going to, in fact, link to my argument about the role of affects in politics. People need to really see who is this adversary. And capitalism is just too abstract, too vague to really be able to mobilize people. So, what is important here is to target nodal points of power in order to transform the existing hegemony. So instead of saying, the enemy is capitalism, we need to see what are the institutions that we are going to target. And this is why, in fact, what the idea of the war of position. And Gramsci distinguished that from the war of maneuver. War of maneuver is to get completely rid of the order. War of position is, we are going to fight because the power, for instance, is never located in just one place. There are always what we call nodal points in which power is constructed. So we need to engage with the institution and engage with those locus of power. And this is why the war of position needs to be launched in a multiplicity of sites. And this requires establishing a synergy between a variety of actors in social movement, parties and trade unions. That's very important. What is at stake in the war of position is not a withering away of the state and of the variety of institutions through which pluralism is organized, but a profound transformation of the institution through which this pluralism is organized, so as to make them vehicles for the expression of a manifold of democratic demands. For instance, the question of the state can be transformed. It can be, we don't think that it's a monolith that needs to be, abolished. It can be transformed. And that's also very important to understand left populist strategy. And the important here, in fact, and that's part of we understand by radicalization of democracy, is to extend the principle of equality to as many social relations as possible. I mean, so this is really what we say when we speak of envisaging the project of the left as in terms of the process of radicalization of democracy. And you will see later how this relates to my argument about green democratic revolution. So it is with such a discursive hegemonic approach that, in hegemonic strategy, that the reflection of Ernesto Laclau on populist reason is inscribed. And that's the other element in which to understand left populism. The difference of numerous studies that claim to provide the correct definition of populism on the basis of a particular ontic content, Laclau's perspective is a formal one. Populism for him is neither an ideology or a political regime, it is a political strategy. That's very important. That consists in the construction of a political frontier dividing society into two camps. On one side, the underdog, the people, and on the other side, those of power, called the establishment. This political frontier, this is what is characteristic of the populist strategy. And it can be established in different ways, according to how the confrontation is constructed. For instance, it can be constructed in terms of right-wing populism and left-wing populism. Who are the people and who are the people that we are fighting? Here I think it's important to see that it's a point in which there is some affinities and the difference with Marxism, because Marxism, contrarily to liberalism, also speak of a construction of political frontier. But there the frontier is constructed in terms of, the capitalists and the workers, capital or labor. So this is where the political frontier, in hegemonic populist construction, it's much more inclusive. It's not simply, one class. It's an articulation of various demands. I also want to insist here that this confrontation, right-wing populism, left-wing populism, can of course be constructed in many different ways. I mean, there are different forms of right-wing populism. And it depends very much on historical and geographical context in which this frontier is deployed. To apprehend the different form of populism, it is therefore necessary to start from a specific conjuncture from which they emerge. The form of populism in Latin America is different from the form of populism in Europe, in other countries. You can't have a theory of what is populism. They are only populism in plural, and that is very important. So this is how Ernesto Laclau defined populism on populist reason. And I take this idea, and I agree with that, and went in For a Left Populism, that book that I wrote and published in 2018, drawing on the discursive hegemonic approach that we develop in hegemony in socialist strategy and on Laclau's conception of populism, I analyze the specific conjuncture existing in Western Europe in the years following the 2008 crisis, a conjuncture that is characterized by the emergence of a variety of anti-establishment movements. Remember, all those movements, I'll speak of that in a moment, the movement of the place, which emerged starting in 2011, wake of the 2008 crisis. They emerge in the context of a crisis of hegemony of neoliberalism, because in fact 2008 crisis was the beginning of the crisis of hegemony of neoliberalism. And this is the conjuncture that I designate as a populist moment. One of the central claim of that book is that it is in the post-democratic context of the erosion of the democratic ideals of popular sovereignty and equality, and also of the context of the oligarchization of European societies. And that, of course, is the result of 30 years, no, it's 40, but at the moment it was for 30 of neoliberal hegemony, that the populist movement should be understood. So, as I was saying, you need to understand populism to always start from a specific conjuncture. You know, so it's important to see what was the conjuncture at the moment I wrote for left populism. It was the wake of those movements resisted against the post-democratic situation which had been created by the neoliberal hegemony. And I distinguish in this post-democratic situation two main points. The first one is what I call the post-political, and it relates to the fact that the sovereignty of the people, the fact that the people have a voice, is something that is eliminated. Because remember, I mean, it's the moment in which Anthony Giddens, but also here in Germany, Ulrich Beck were saying it's the end of the adversarial model of politics. You know, basically the defense of the dritte Weg, or the third way of Tony Blair and Anthony. No, I can't remember. But that's the idea of basically also relating to there is no alternative. You know, that's what I call the post-political. See, politics is about complicated antagonism. You say that there is no more antagonism. No, we can all agree there is a consensus at the center. Well, of course, if you got a consensus at the center, if there are no more antagonism, then politics is not something in which people can intervene. Politics is something is much better left to expert. You know, so and that's the reason why during that period when they were election, basically there was no fundamental difference between the program presented by the center right and the center left. You know, and I think that has been really very negative in terms of people interested in politics, because in terms of politics, to be interested, you need to find politics is always partisan, and you need to be able to identify with one of the camp. You know, if basically it does not make any fundamental difference, people lose interest in politics. And I think that the development of abstention is one of the consequences of the fact that nothing was really at stake anymore in the election. You know, so speak of popular sovereignty doesn't make sense. People don't have a right to say decide. For instance, this very specific of we remember the indignados in Spain. One of their the man was there. We want they were saying tenemos un voto, pero no tenemos voz. I mean, we've got a vote, but we don't have a voice, because we don't have a real choice in the election. And I think that that's something with what I speak the development of populist movement is a reaction against that post-democratic and post-political situation. And this is why I say it is in a sense a cry for democracy. We want to be heard. We want, to be able to express an alternative. For me, that's quite important to recognize that there is an element of democratic demand in those populist movements. Of course, this demand can be articulated in many different ways, and obviously, right-wing populism construct a people through an ethno-nationalist discourse that exclude migrants, which are considered as a threat to national identity and prosperity. And they advocate a democracy. They say, we want to recuperate democracy, but democracy aims at exclusively defending the interests of those considered true national. So we could say that in the name of recovering democracy, what they want is in fact to restrict democracy. And I argue for left populism that to impede the success of the right-wing populist strategy, and to bring about a progressive issue to the crisis of neoliberalism, what is needed is the construction of another people around an inclusive project which addresses the diverse form of subordination around issues concerning, for instance, exploitation, of course, domination and discrimination. This is how I envisage a left populist strategy. So it's wider, that there are more movement. For instance, the aim in this case is to articulate the variety of democratic demands in view of constructing a popular majority able to come to power and to establish a new hegemonic formation. And of course, it means that an articulation of the demand of the workers, but the amount, of feminists, the amount about gender, the amount about racism. And of course, I'm going to, already we were saying in that moment, already in hegemony, in fact, we speak of the importance of ecological demand. And I come against, develop that even more in for left populism. But I think that at that moment, at least I speak for myself, but I think not only for myself, we were seeing this ecological question as a theoretical question. More or less, okay, they are democratic demands. The difference, and that's why, there are a difference of insistence for left populism, and my current book, for a green democratic revolution, is that now I think this question has become existential. The climate crisis have made us, and I think that's of course very recent, because obviously it's not a new issue. We've been told a long time that this model could not go on. But yeah, it was theoretical. I think now we are really living that in an existential way, and I'm going to develop in a moment this question. So, but here, what I want to insist on another thing, that this strategy of recovering democracy followed by left-wing populism is what is at stake is a process of recover democracy, again, it's a critique of post-democracy, but in this case, in order to radicalize democracy by extending it to many more social relations. So not only a relation, of the working class relation, but the question of feminism, anti-racism, all those demands need to be articulated. So instead of having the worker class, and we need what we call a peopleist articulation of all those demands. Here another important point. Such a strategy does not aim at a radical break with pluralist liberal democracy and to the foundation of a totally new political order. It should be envisaged as a process of radicalization of democracy that engage with the existing institution in view of transforming them through democratic procedure. And this is why it's really clearly different from the revolutionary strategy of what is called the extreme left, even if I don't really like the term of radical left, but also from the sterile reformism of the social liberals. So I think that if we speak of the left, we can distinguish reformist left, completely reformist, or a revolutionary one. And in this case, left-wing populism is a strategy what I call radical reformism. Here I feel, I don't know if you will agree with me, that there are point of contact with the argument made by Adrian Bullock, for instance, because in my book I also refer to the importance of non-reformist reforms, the idea that was developed by André Gortz, I think is very important, reform which in fact have consequences to put into question, even if in a longer, not on the radical break, but they want to create a new hegemony. I could also, for instance, here make some reference to the strategy developed by Eric Olin Wright in his book How to be a Capitalist in Anti-Capitalist in the 20th century or 21st, where he speaks of strategy of eroding capitalism. Not trying to, for instance, people say, we want to abolish capitalism. Okay, nice, but you can't imagine a government arriving in power and say, we are going to abolish capitalism. It doesn't mean anything that abolish capitalism. What you can do is to really erode capitalism. I like this expression of Olin Wright very much, and this is what I call a strategy of radical reformism. Series of reform which have got the aim to really create a new hegemony. Okay, so this is the context of my reflection, though I'm coming to the Green Democratic Revolution. So the question that I address in this recent book concerns the pertinence of a left populist strategy in the wake of the sanitary crisis caused by the COVID-19. The conjuncture today, I think we need to acknowledge it, is different from the one existing before the pandemic, to the point that there have been several people arguing that no, the strategy of left populism is obsolete. It was a strategy that was corresponded maybe to this moment of what we call a hot populist mobilization, and of course this has been stopped by the confinement and by the COVID. So we need to acknowledge that the conjuncture now is different. And again, I insist, we need always to start from conjuncture in order to envisage a populist mobilization. And the question I want to ask is that, okay, are we now then in the midst of a new conjuncture that requires envisaging a different strategy for the left, or is the left-wing populist strategy still relevant? And of course, I'm going to argue that it's still relevant, but it needs to be reformulated in order to give central importance to, the ecological question. Because, and here, I'm touching to the question of the role of affects. One of the consequences of the pandemic is that people here, and I think people in general, there is a feeling of vulnerability very, very strongly. And of course, I think this has been even increased by the war in Ukraine and the geopolitical transformation. So today, if we try to see what is the main effects, is question of vulnerability. And of course, it means that the demand for security and protection. I think this is really what characterizes the actual conjuncture. And of course, this demand for protection can be articulated in different ways, in progressive one or in regressive one. And it can certainly, and it does in fact in some places, benefit right-wing populism. Because the right-wing populism, they've got, the solution is, to close the frontier, expel the immigrants. They've got a very simple answer. This is what we need in order to have security and protection. So in terms of exclusive nationalism. And of course, they are attempting to promote such a view, and with different success in different countries. But I think, and this for me is something that is quite important, it will be a mistake to believe that our main struggle is no with right-wing populists, and that all other forces are not so urgent. Because I think, of course, and is still with right-wing populists, and more so in certain countries than in others. But I am particularly concerned by the fact that this desire for protection and security is already being exploited by neoliberal governments who are trying to reinforce their power by fostering the development of a neoliberal version of techno-authoritarianism, presenting it as the best way to provide security and protection. And of course, among that, the whole strategy of green capitalism, for me, this is a way to say, well, no, we've got the solution, to the ecological crisis. We are going to give you protection, but it is through the development of technology, geoengineering, and those things. This is for me probably the most dangerous alternative, and we need to be aware of that because, in fact, they are trying to present this techno-authoritarianism as the best way to provide security and protection, and they are trying to reach their aim by advocating what Evgeny Morozov called technological solutionism. In the book, To Save Everything, Click Here, Morozov warned us against the danger of this ideology of solutionism promoted by the Silicon Valley. And according to this, very pernicious and dangerous ideology, that all the problems, even political ones, have got a technological solution. So in fact, they defend post-ideological measures and deploy technology to avoid politics. Because in that case, as I was saying, only experts, are the ones who should decide. The citizenship is really not in condition to decide what is good. And I see this technological solutionism as, in fact, a technological version of the post-political conception that I referred to before and that I criticized on the political. After some years during which, through what we call the hot populist moment and populist mobilization seems to indicate there was a break with post-politics, because I think what is characteristic of this eruption of movement is a reaction against against post-politics. But as I was saying, it can take, right-wing or left-wing form. But at the moment, in fact, I think that, and this populist movement was what I call in one of my books some kind of a return of the political. Political was, after those years of center politics, no, things were being politicized again. A frontier was constructed, But now we are witnessing a renewed attempt by political forces to dethrone the political. It's a reaction against, they see the danger of this return of the political, so they are trying to find ways in which they can really, as Hayek was saying, remember that Hayek, when he developed his theory, was saying, we need to dethrone the political. That was his ambition, and it was at the core of the neoliberal offensive at the end of the 70s. Democracy is really going too far. They are too much, and we need to dethrone politics. Well, and this is what led to neoliberal hegemony, which was put into question by the populist movement in its hot phase, and now there are attempts to re-establish this kind of post-politics. And I think we must be aware that the COVID-19 is no doubt represented a great opportunity for the tech giant to extend their control and their belief that digital platforms could provide a foundation for the political order. In fact, it chimes with the claim of third-wave politicians in the 80s and 90s that political antagonism have been overcome and that left and right categories are zombie categories. This is what I think zombie category was a term used by Ulrich Beck. And of course, that was put into question by the populist surge, but now they are trying to re-establish this ideology, but in a form of technological solutionism. So obviously, I think that solutionism can or could contribute to facilitate the acceptance of post-democratic forms of digital authoritarianism, forms that remain immune from democratic control. Again, it will be the expert who have got a voice. And I think we can already see that in the effects of that, in the fact that many people are today, in the hope of getting protection, accepting form of digital control that they had so far opposed. I mean, I've been struck by that. The sense of digital control that, at least I'm speaking particularly from the case of Britain, which I know best, but a little bit of France too. I don't know in Germany how is the situation, but I think that there is some kind of, we don't really like it, but that's for protection. We need it, to have security and protection. So I think that if this offensive is successful, it might in fact bring a new lease of life to neoliberalism. What we are saying is a new type of neoliberalism. And that could, the digital technological one, and that could offer the possibility to neoliberalism to, I take here an expression from Wolfgang Streeck in his book, Buying Time, to buy time again, because I don't think that green capitalism, but I don't see the long term that it could really provide a solution to the ecological crisis. But it can buy time for capitalism. Create a period in which, people believe, no, that we've got the solution. So it's a way to impede at least for a time, the development of putting into question of some form of here, of course, when I say capitalism, I mean here I particularly speak of financial capitalism, because I think that financial capitalism is really the one which is linked with fossil fuel industries, and which are at the moment the decarbonation is one of the main issues. So if we can convince people that this green capitalism can provide a solution to the decarbonation, then of course people will accept, say, okay, let's see, maybe that. So it's a way to delay the real offensive. So one say that I think that how can we try to impede this legitimation of this new form of capitalism, green capitalism? And my central argument is that for those who want to impede neoliberalism to restore its hegemony by imposing a new form of post-democratic authoritarian digital model, and I think that's what green capitalism is, and to propose that this is the solution to the sanitary, social, economic, and geopolitical crisis, it is necessary to address the demand for protection. And I think here I see a problem with the left in general, which I think is much too rationalistic, and would tend to believe demand for protection and security, that is a conservative demand. This is what the demand that favorize the right. So I think that we should address this question, and because this question can perfectly have a left-wing answer. And in fact, I think definitively, for instance, a progressive answer can be much more effective in providing security and protection. Because the welfare state and a series of things were already some form of providing security protection. I don't know what you say in German, but for instance, in France, la sécurité sociale, which is basically what was instaured by the welfare state, was social security. So there is a way to produce security and protection, which is not closing the frontier, having authoritarian form. There is a left way, a progressive way of providing security and protection. And this is what is really important for the left today, to address that question. And unfortunately, I see that it's a topic which with the left is usually not very at ease, So protection, security, that's a demand which indicates, right-wing thing. No, it's a right-wing affect. No, I think it could be articulated in a right-wing way, but it could be articulated also in a progressive way. So I think what is important is to address this demand for protection, but articulating it with the ideal of social justice and with democratic values, and that's definitely can be done. But the question, of course, is, how can we arouse common affect around a conception of protection articulated with democratic values? I mean, for me, that's basically the question that I address in my last book. Because I think that in order to create a collective will, this really is a question of mobilizing affect. Not only affect, of course, but it's not ideas which are enough. For instance, I think that we need to accept that this need to be made, this demand of protection needs to be made in central place in the political agenda. Because with the ecological crisis, we have in fact begun to realize that we have entered a new era in which the struggle for social justice needs to include a new dimension. During the 20th century, what was at the core of the socialist project was the question of inequality, and the fight for social justice was conceived in terms of an equal repartition of the fruits of growth. The struggle of the new social movement added new angles to the question of social struggle and social justice. This is what we study in Hegemony Socialist Strategy. But their focus was mainly on autonomy and liberty. And with the exception of some ecological movement, they did not fundamentally target the nature of growth. I think that with the climate emergency is or maybe should make us aware that the struggle for social justice requires putting into question the productivist and the extractivist model. Growth has ceased to be considered as a source of protection, to become a danger for the reproduction of the material condition of existence and for the habitability of the planet. It is not possible anymore to envisage a process of radicalization of democracy, which is my main argument is what project of the left should be about, but it's not possible to envisage it without advocating the end of a model of growth that jeopardizes the existence of society, in whom destructive effects are particularly felt by the more vulnerable groups. And this is why I think it's no essential to put the question of what I call ecological bifurcation at the center of a radical democratic project. I'm not, of course, the only one to speak of radical bifurcation, and I want to insist why I prefer that term to ecological transition. I think that we should have a bifurcation, not only a transition, because it needs to be a radical one. And I think that the term bifurcation indicates this radical. And it requires a systemic change and a break with financial capitalism. That is why a radical ecological bifurcation requires the construction of political frontier and the designation of an adversary. And this is why I argue that in the present conjuncture, the left populist strategy is the one which is required because it precisely establishes a frontier. It is what I understand by a bifurcation. And we need to have an adversary. We need to acknowledge there is an adversary. And I think, for me, a problem is that this is not enough recognized by most green or ecological movement, because they believe that an inclusive consensus should be available on ecological issue. Their argument is that, well, it's a question that engage us all. So on this question, at least we should agree. Well, I think that's, to not acknowledge that politics is always partisan. And obviously, I think probably we've been discussing that there are forces which are opposed to this bifurcation. So there is clearly an adversary. And I think the ecological movement need to acknowledge that. They are not going to be able to, simply convince all people and have some consensus, wide consensus. And here I touch again the question of the affect, because once we accept that we need to have, if there is an adversary, we need to have a collective will which is going to be able to bring this together. How are we going to bring about such a collective will? The question is often overlooked on the left because of the rationalist theoretical framework that too often inform left politics. They spend a lot of energies. I think for the left politics, but what we need is a good program. If we've got a good program, people are going to accept it, to be convinced. Well, I think that, unfortunately, is not enough to have a well-elaborated program with great policies, because correct ideas, good programs are not enough. And Spinoza reminded us, and I think that's for me an important contribution of Spinoza, ideas only have force when they meet affects. I'm not saying here, because sometimes you've been criticized of, you want to abandon rationality and say only a question of affect. No, I think of course ideas are important, but ideas must be articulated with affects. To generate adhesion and make people to act, those policies have to enter in resonance with the desire and personal experience of the people they want to interpellate. And this is again why I think that a left populist strategy is particularly suited in the present condition, because it really stresses the decisive role that affects play in politics. And so it's for me another important advantage, when it comes to envisaging how to mobilize affect around the project of ecological bifurcation. So my answer to that question is that to awaken affects and arouse enthusiasm, I propose to envisage the ecological bifurcation on the mode of a green democratic revolution. At least as a new phase of the democratic revolution, as a process of deepening of democracy. A deepening of democracy that connects the defense of the environment and the habitability of the planet with the manifold democratic struggle against different forms of inequality. And this is, I think, why the struggle for equality and liberty, what I call the democratic imaginary, is very important. And it's something that is pregnant in our societies, even if, was a little bit attacked by neoliberalism. But I feel that to mobilize it, or let's put it in a further, it's important to mobilize the affective force of the democratic imaginary. Is still important, because one example I could give of why it's important is that, in fact, many resistances against the post-democratic condition and against various forms of oppression are expressed as democratic demands and testify to the crucial role played by the signifier democracy in the political imaginary. It is no doubt important to recognize that the main target of the movement of the square, I already gave you the example of the indignados, but in fact it's common to all the movement of the squares, they did not call for socialism, but they called for a real democracy. And this is what shows that the democratic imaginary is very important today. And it should be the hegemonic signifier that bring together the chain of equivalence, which articulate ecological question with the workers' demand and with other democratic demands around feminism, anti-racism, LGBT plus issue. So this is the proposal of a green democratic revolution to create, act on the democratic imaginary, which is very important in our societies, but present this green democratic revolution. And here, of course, the term revolution, I'm not using that in Bolshevik sense of revolution, but I think of a radical reformist sense. It is, according to me, something that should be able to appeal to constituencies which have not so far identified with the left.
Professor Mouffe, I risk of being the most impolite person in the world.
My last sentence.
Okay,
thank you. So, by appealing to constituencies which have so far not identified with the left, such a left populist strategy should be able to construct a transversal popular movement that could create a majority to bring about a progressive alternative to an increasingly authoritarian neoliberalism. Thank you.